Here at Team TripleJump, we've often extolled the virtues of video games with lots of content. After all, many of us are northerners, and we like to know we're getting our money's worth. There are some games, however, that take this sentiment just a scooch too far, and we're left with titles that end up consuming our whole lives. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if the game is enjoyable, but sometimes we find ourselves jumping into a game only to emerge bleary-eyed several days later, wondering where the heck the weekend has gone and having barely scratched the surface of what it has to offer. For this list then, we're looking at video games that take a ridiculous amount of time to complete, owing to their insanely long main stories, numerous side quests, or achievements that take weeks, if not months, to unlock. We won't be including games like Animal Crossing, where there's no real endgame, nor will we be including any MMORPGs on account of the fact that their developers are always adding new content for players to enjoy. And just to be clear, when we're talking about people with too much time on their hands, we're not saying, if you like this game, you must have too much time on your hands, get a life, why have you got no friends, you suck. What we are saying is that if you feel you've got too much time on your hands and want something to fill in those evening hours, then here are 10 games that you might want to give a go. You know, just try and be positive about it. Have a good time. Everyone can enjoy these games and not feel insulted by the video title. Anyway, with that out of the way, I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games for people with too much time on their hands. Number 10. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Although GTA 5 has been released on every electrical device known to mankind by this point, it's still unable to stand up to the sheer grandeur of San Andreas. The game might not be quite as beefy as some of the others on this list, but it is pretty darn long, which is especially impressive considering it's nearly 20 years old. Oh, the writer really had to throw that factoid in to make us feel ancient, didn't she? Like several of the other entries into the Steely Wheely Automobile franchise, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is set in a sprawling open world that players are free to peruse and explore at their leisure. There is of course a main storyline running through the whole thing, which follows Carl C.J. Johnson as he returns home following the murder of his mother and the associated palavers he gets himself into, and there are also heaps of side missions too. If you're not bothered about side quests, you'll probably get through San Andreas in about 30 hours, but keep picking up those odd jobs and you're going to rack up several days of gameplay before you even make a dent in all of the gang warfare.
There's no stopping you.
Number 9. Fallout 4. Though its outward appearance has changed a great deal since making its debut in 1997, the Fallout series has always kept one thing constant, and that is its lengthy runtimes. Although the OG title's 30 hours of content may seem a little humble nowadays, especially in comparison to its third sequel, that's still a decent chunk of gameplay. Anyone looking to play 2015's Fallout 4 can expect to sink that much time into the main story alone, and that's before even touching all of the extra stuff that this post-apocalyptic title has on offer. In terms of gameplay, players will find themselves awakening in the year 2287 after a 210-year-long snooze. Unfortunately, your lengthy period of rest is about the only good thing that's going to happen to you for a while, as your spouse is murdered and your son, Sean, no, not that one, is kidnapped. From there, it's time to explore the nuclear wasteland and see if you can't find the little lad. There's really no rush though, and since you've got 2 centuries worth of history to catch up on and plenty of interesting characters to befriend, we can't say we blame you for racking up a few hours moseying about the place before, trying to rescue your own flesh and blood. Sean will be fine, he's a big boy. Number 8. Red Dead Redemption 2. If you're looking to immerse yourself in a lengthy title but don't feel like facing the horrors of nuclear devastation, then why not grab yourself a 6-shooter and a fancy hat and jump into the world of Red Dead Redemption, or more specifically its sequel, Red Dead Redemption 2. Not only does the game tell a story of epic proportions, but it also has more side quests than you can shake a horse at. No, don't do that. Players step into the shoes of Arthur Morgan, an outlaw and member of the Van der Linde gang who is simply trying to make his way in the Old West. Naturally, there are plenty of trials and tribulations along the way, and Arthur must navigate the threats posed by government officials, rival gangs, and even the odd bear or two. If you're expecting to go into Red Dead 2 for a couple of hours of yee-haw fun, then I'm sorry to say that
either you got a lazy eye or lack of respect. Which is it, boy?
In fact, you're not even going to make it through Arthur's main storyline without giving Grand Theft Horse over 2 full days of your attention, and that's assuming you don't sleep or anything either. Feel like completing the whole thing? Well, you better clear that schedule, buddy, because no one's getting hold of you for a couple of weeks.
Liberty and the pursuit of happiness.
Number 7. Dragon Age Inquisition. If you're someone with far too much time on your hands and a serious passion for winged lizards, you could do far worse than pick up a copy of Dragon Age Inquisition. Released in 2014 and developed by BioWare, Dragon Age Inquisition tells the story of the sole survivor of a blast that tears a hole in the Veil, the boundary between the physical world and the world of spirits and demons. Ooh. It's up to the player to fight the numerous monsters that have emerged from the rift, settle the ensuing civil unrest, and ultimately close the breach. After both Dragon Age 2 and Mass Effect 3 got significant backlash from players, BioWare decided to take on all of their feedback and ended up creating Inquisition, which wound up winning a ton of Game of the Year awards. Players looking to complete just the main quest can expect to sink nearly 50 hours into the game, but if you're looking for that sweet, sweet platinum trophy, it's going to take over 5 whole days of your life. However, considering the immense quality of the game, the stunning world, and the excellent writing, there are far worse ways you could choose to spend your time. Number 6. Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We'd hate to accuse a game of unnecessary bloat, but it does feel like the runtime of Assassin's Creed Valhalla could have been reduced significantly if less of it had been spent boating. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good sea shanty as much as the next man or woman, but it did feel like I spent a good portion of the game just navigating various rivers and coastlines. Even if you were to remove the seafaring segments of Assassin's Creed Valhalla though, there is still an awful lot of content, with most players taking nearly 60 hours to complete just the main story. Anyone feeling a tad more adventurous and looking to uncover all of these secrets within London, Jorvik and Nottinghamshire, amongst others, would need to set aside upwards of 130 hours, which incidentally is longer than James Franco lasted before choosing to saw his own arm off. Of course, I jest, as Valhalla is a wonderful entry into the Assassin's Creed franchise, weaving a very human tale of loyalty, sacrifice, and belief against a Viking backdrop. The gameplay is largely fun and engaging, the characters are multidimensional, and the settings of England and Norway are nothing short of stunning. All we ask for is fewer boats next time. Okay, Ubisoft? No! Number 5. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Our friends at Nintendo are never ones to shy away from trying new things, and this willingness to change things up wholly benefited The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Rather than sticking with the usual linear storytelling of the previous games, Nintendo opted for an open-world experience that allowed players to get their adventure on. Players once again join the heroic Link after he awakens from a 100-year slumber and must journey across the realm of Hyrule in order to defeat the evil Calamity Ganon. If you're purely interested in the main storyline, then that alone will take you several days of solid gameplay to complete, though it is worth bearing in mind that the game doesn't offer much in the way of instruction, so even the most narrative-focused players might find it hard not to stray off the beaten path once in a while. If you are all about those sweet, sweet side quests, however, then you're probably going to need at least a week to accommodate all that Hyrule has on offer, especially if you're planning on collecting the 900 Korok seeds that are scattered about the game. Oh, hope you've got plenty of annual leave left. Number 4. Final Fantasy XII. By this point, it's well established that the Final Fantasy games are time-consuming, and with the possible exception of the franchise's MMOs, there's none quite as lengthy as Final Fantasy XII. In fairness though, you can't really tell the story of a tyrannical empire and the resistance movement fighting it in a couple of hours. Well, you probably could, but, wouldn't be very good, would it?
What a joker.
In contrast to its predecessors, Final Fantasy XII is more open in its presentation, and though the series didn't technically make the leap to a completely open world until the release of 15, 12 still allows players to wander off the beaten path to uncover all of the game's secrets. Naturally, this meant that not only was there a beefy main story to enjoy, but lots of other little tidbits that players could spend several hours on as well. Although one absolute mad lad was able to speedrun the game in just over 5 hours and 40 minutes, it takes most players more than 10 times that just to complete the main story. If you do decide to stray from the overarching plot though and go on an achievement hunt, then there's enough content jammed into Final Fantasy XII to keep you occupied for well over a week. Number 3. Persona 5 Royal. According to critics, Persona 5 is one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and that's probably thanks in part to the massive amounts of content it has on offer. Persona 5 Royal takes all of that and adds even more into the mix, so it's kind of like getting an extra scoop of ice cream on top of a very, very, very large sundae.
I'm supposed to get a toy with this?
The story follows a student codenamed Joker who, after transferring to a new school, forms the vigilante group the Phantom Thieves of Heart with his classmates. Against a Tokyo backdrop, the group begins stealing the corruption from the hearts of the city's adults and uncovering a wider conspiracy along the way. In order to make it to the story's conclusion, players will need to set aside over 100 hours, which may sound like an awful lot, but there's no part of the game that is unnecessary padding. So not only do players get to experience one of the best RPGs ever made, but they get loads and loads of it to enjoy. No game of such magnitude would be complete without side quests, of course, so if you're planning on having a crack at them too, you're probably going to need another 40 hours just to make sure you're not missing anything out. Number 2. Xenoblade Chronicles X. Before you even think about undertaking any of the myriad side quests that Xenoblade Chronicles X has on offer, I would implore you to first consider that completing the main story alone takes most players almost 3 full days. And do please keep in mind that when we're talking about days and weeks in this list, we're talking non-stop gameplay, like toothpicks holding your eyelids open sort of deal. Indeed, Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Wii U is an incredibly long game, but unlike some others that may pad their runtimes with boring and useless fluff, the vast majority of the game is incredibly engaging and fun to play, so you might be able to stay awake all by yourself. Considering it takes the best part of 70 hours to play through the story in full, it's probably not a surprise that the plot of Xenoblade Chronicles X is a bit complicated, but it basically boils down to humanity having to relocate to a new planet after an intergalactic war has destroyed Earth, and the player character becoming a protector of their new home, all whilst exploring and uncovering its secrets. Naturally, some of the missions are just basically fetch quests, which would usually get old quite quickly, but when you're immersed in such a beautiful world, well, it's just impossible to be mad about it. And number 1, Monster Hunter World. Short of diving headfirst into the world of MMORPGs or playing the same game over and over and over again, you're going to struggle to find a title into which you can put quite as much time as Monster Hunter World. Released in 2018, this gargantuan game received universal critical acclaim for its graphics, story, and of course, the sheer number of things there are to do. We aren't quite sure how, but Capcom somehow managed to strike the balance between staying true to the series while also making Monster Hunter World accessible to new players, and it earned an awful lot of fans in the process. Players get to create their own character and adorable little Palico friend before heading out into the world and hunting down a whole bunch of monsties. The main plotline of the game comes in at a very reasonable 40-ish hours. However, a reasonable runtime does not the top spot win, and those looking to fully complete the game with all all of its associated achievements and side quests will need to put in just shy of 400 hours. For context, that's more time than your average full-time employee will be expected to work in 2 months. Just excuse me for a minute. Hi, Adam, it's Peter. Yeah, I'm not going to be in for the next 10 weeks or so.